my name is Carla. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how a signal travels from the neuron all the way to move your fingers. Also, how the neuromuscular junction functions and the sliding filament mechanism that is down here. This is going to be the graph of today, and also we have the action potential on the top. And yeah. First, we have the brain. Everything begins in the primary motor cortex, which is a part of the brain responsible for voluntary movement when I decide to move my fingers. Neurons in the motor cortex create an electrical signal called an axial potential, which is right here. This axial potential is the message that tells my muscles when it's time to contract. Second of all, we have the spinal cord. This is the action that the actual potential travels down through the brainstem into the spinal cord. The spinal cord acts like a highway, carrying information from the brain to the rest of your body. Then we have the motor neuron. From the spinal cord, the signal leaves through the motor neuron, which is a part of the peripheral nervous system. The electrical impulses travel down the axon motor neuron until it has reached the muscle. We're going to explain the axial potential. Look at the graph. At rest, which is right here, the neuron has a resting membrane potential, which is about -70. When enough stimulation reaches the neuron, it reaches the threshold of a -55. At this point, the voltage gate sodium channel opens, allowing the sodium to go in to enter the cell. This is what causes depolarization, where the inside of the neuron becomes more positive. Next, the sodium closes and potassium enters. Potassium leaves the neuron, causing repolarization. Sometimes the membrane becomes slightly more negative than the resting potential. This is called the hyperpolarization. Finally, the potassium-sodium pump restores the resting membrane potential by pumping 3 sodiums in and 2 potassiums out, preparing the neuron for the other action potential. Moving forward, we have the neuromuscular junction, which is when the axial potential reaches the end of the motor neuron, which is when the calcium enters. This causes tiny vesicles right here to release a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine causes the sympactic cleft and binds to receptors on muscle fiber, which this leads to opening calcium channels into the muscle. The sodium enters the muscle cell and creates new action potential inside of the muscle fiber. And then we have here the filament sliding, which is when the calcium binds to a protein called the troponin. When troponin changes shapes, it moves to another protein called the tropomyosin, away from binding sites on actin. This allows the myosin heads to attach to actin, forming what is called a cross bridge. The myosin heads pull the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere. This movement is called the power stroke. After the power stroke, ATP attaches to the myosin heads, causing it to release actin. The ATP it is then broken down into ADP and phosphate, which is what recooks the myosin heads so it can be attached again. This cycle repeats as many times as long as calcium and ATP are consistently present. As more cross bridges form, the sarcomere shorten, muscle contracts, and finally my fingers will move. So in conclusion, The summary is that it goes from the brain to the spinal cord to the motor neuron to the neuromuscular junction, which then moves to the muscle fiber, causing calcium to release, which then goes straight into the sliding filament, which causes my fingers to move. All of this is a working thing that goes every time just for my fingers to be able to move.